Hello, and thanks for listening. I wanted to share an experience that I had when I went to South Carolina. I went out to the South, and it was some years back. And I went and I stayed out there a little while and to visit some relatives. And what I noticed is that most of the commercials, there was some commercials that were just, just like you see a tissue commercial on TV, or if you see a commercial about Dove soap, there were gun commercials. And it was a lot different than living in the city. In the city, you don't really see gun commercials, or at least I hadn't seen them. And so I've seen gun commercials in the South, and the commercials are really, really prevalent. And so I noticed that the commercials would come on and it would advertise guns, but primarily for people who were involved in the sport of hunting. But I beg to differ because I feel like that's an excuse for some. Now, some people really are in the sport of hunting, and or they go to a shooting range and they may not even have a fire, and they're within their rights to use it. And what I do notice is there are some people, just like collectors of stamps, collectors of dolls, collectors of like comic books, there are people who are obsessed with guns. And so I was looking at an article in the Sun, and there's this guy. He says, "Meet one man, Army, who owns more than 3,000 weapons, and he boasts about owning the weapons." And so he goes under a scary title, quote, "The most armed man in America." And so this guy is not the only one. I'm just using this as an example article because he's not the only person, because some people who maybe they were in the military, or maybe they're in the sport of hunting, or they're a gun collector. There are people who are really heavily involved with firearms. And it's going to be hard for those individuals to really accept the fact that it's um, stipulations, harder rules, guidelines under who can and cannot be in possession of guns. So anyway, it goes on to say that this guy, his name is Mel Bernstein. He estimates that his military collection in Colorado is worth millions. And so he talks about owning his guns. And he says he's in a country where it's believed that there are two guns for every resident. One pistol packing American is doing his bit to bump up the averages. So Mel Bernstein, known as the Dragon Man, has earned the title of the most armed man in the US and has a frightening 3,000 weapons in his collection. Probably has more by now, of course. And that doesn't include the tanks. He also owns tanks. So this is some of his military weaponry. He is a devout gun collector, and he's surrounded by guns. Even he has a room where he has heavy artillery. He sleeps surrounded by machine guns mounted on his firing range. So this is another room with his collection of heavy ammunition and artillery. And the weapons collector has 3,000 and they're working weapons, so they're not obsolete, like, weapons that are inactive or are not able to be used. So he goes by the name of Mel Bernstein, who has earned a nickname thanks to his flamethrower rigged motorbike, has now given a tour inside his vast private military museum known as the Dragonland. The gun lover's paradise of El Paso Country, Colorado boasts a firing range, a paintball course, and 80 military vehicles, and a store licensed to sell automatic firearms and weapons. In total, the collector has 3,000 working weapons ranging from samurai swords to bazookas. And with the snake tattoo covering his arms, the biker doesn't seem to care what society thinks about his mind-blowing collection, which is worth more than probably $8 million. And so there also is a video of him, most armed man in America, that gives a tour of his deadliest weapons, so you can look at it. Mr. Bernstein claims that he has more than 200 machine guns in his collection. He also has 3,000 working weapons, including the samurai sword. And here's a heavy artillery tank that he owns. And so here he is right here. He collects. He spent a year with the forces serving in Vietnam. Once again, like I said, some people have a history of being in the war. And so with that, when they leave, they don't leave, the war doesn't leave them on the inside. They may have left the war, but the war doesn't leave some of those people. So today we're going to explain in this article, they call him the most armed man in America, Mr. Bernstein. So he gives a video tour, and he gives a tour of his own little museums of weaponry. So you already know enough about this one individual. He's just one of many. He's not the only one. There are other people who, now I'm assuming that this guy is I'm under the assumption or under the impression that he's pretty, stable mentally, and that he's working under the guise within his right to own this collection. But there may be people that are looking at this and appalled by this whole thing. And they may think, well, what do you need all of that for? Why do you have that? What's the reason for it? And so I'm sure there's probably several comments surrounding his reason for having these weapons. So here's a comment. I won't give the name of the person. He has over 300 weapons, which he includes blades. I got that beat. I have nearly 3,500 swords and bayonets in 50 different countries, from 50 different countries that date from 1840 to present. He has an awesome collection nonetheless. So that's someone that is basically praising him, and they are admitting that they have well over 500 more than swords than he has. That's awesome. Too much for my taste, but still way awesome. Wow, that's not frightening. It's a darn great museum. Here in Idaho, something like is considered to be only a modest gun collection. So in other words, these are people who like that this man has these weapons, and they're either saying that they have more, or they're intrigued by it, or they would think that's not really enough weapons. More than 900 uniformed mannequins sound like the London police. Those are comments. I'll make a $10 bet for all you gun-grabbing leftards, fast as pigs. I bet this man's personal firearm collection has killed fewer people than Ted Kennedy's Oldsmobile. So this is someone who is, I guess, they're for the right-wing politics, and they more are for guns being owned by people and not being demonized as being the problem. He's my idol. That's another comment. I'm triggered. My idol. So apparently the people that are intrigued by this, most of them are gun-loving individuals. I can't imagine how many times he licked that big bullet. So these are people obsessed with guns, of course. He better have great security, whether ISIS, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, which is BLM, or John Brown. The list of terrorists is long. So in other words, they label all of these, even the Black Lives Matter, as terrorists. So they're saying that he should have better security, meaning, what are they going to do? Go in there and they're going to steal his arsenal. I think it would be a mistake to try to rob this guy. So, of course, because maybe he, if he served in the armed forces, I'm sure he knows how to use those weapons. He practices on them like every other week. Dang, he's got my 86 beat by a mile. There's nothing frightening about this guy and his gun collection. I want him as my neighbor. Freedom. The thought Tony Montana shot him at Lopez Motors in Scarface. Come on. Okay. To many, slaves' freedom is scary because they are living under a false sense of security and safety. But actually, worldwide, it is governments, including the US government, that are the biggest and the most vicious, ruthless practitioners of gun violence. Okay, so it goes on and on and on and on about all the different comments that people have based upon this man's gun collection. Okay, so I just thought that was interesting to make the point clear that this gun reform that they're pushing for may not be as easy as they think, because what I have also noticed to add to this is I actually, for the first time, went to, and I'll admit this, I went to a shooting range. And I'll be honest with you, most of the people who were there, they weren't Black. I'm not saying there weren't Black folks there, but there were like, I could count on one hand how many Black people were there. And I guess there's that fear that, with the long jail sentences, being accused of crimes that we really don't commit, just regular law-abiding African-American citizens are afraid to arm themselves with firearms because of that incident that happened with some of the recent events that have taken place. Like in Minnesota with, the young man that was killed in his car with the girlfriend. Trayvon Martin. You could just go on down the line. The thing with Zimmerman, him having his gun and using it on the teenager. Just there's a fear that African Americans most have in terms of being caught with a firearm, that you could be shot just for having it and having it in your possession, even though you legally own the gun, open and carry state, And so these are issues that are very scary, even for, regular people that maybe they've never used a gun and they've never actually fired off a gun. You have these thoughts in the back of your mind, like, what if the gun backfires? What if something doesn't work? What if I don't know what I'm doing? What if I kill myself? And so if you're not an avid gun owner, collector, or person that shoots guns, you have no knowledge of what it is, unless you're in law enforcement, or you were in the service, the armed forces, or you're just somebody, maybe you're in the criminal underworld and you have no worries about using firearms because you have used them before. And sorry to say, this gun reform is an ongoing battle, but I'm afraid that it won't be easy to win, because most of the people that I saw that were at the firing range, they were white. And I'm being honest, they were white. And even in the South, most of the commercials and most of the pawn shops. There are white people that, that they have guns in the pawn shop. There are white people, they own guns. They have like one or two guns in their house. Mainly, they have like two guns or three guns. And it's um, usually what I've seen, it's either white people who, they're from the South or they served in the armed forces. If it is people of color, they're in fear of someone breaking into their home. But most times, if it's, in the South, what I've seen, it's like there's no fear, it seems, from what I've noticed with white people to carry guns. It's like a freedom or like a right for them to have that gun, and they always stand by it by using their amendment laws or amendment rights. And so I think this whole reform gun thing is going to be a hard thing to combat, because most of those white kids, I would bet that some of their parents own firearms. And I know this may seem like, in light of the situation, that it throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing, but most of the people that I seen at the shooting range seem like regular white working class people, but they knew how to shoot firearms. Some of them probably weren't in the service. They just knew how to use the gun, and they didn't have the fear of using the gun. They were I seen people just, it was just a thrill. And so this is just one prime example here. And so what makes it crazy is that usually you always have this issue where if it's someone that is of an African American persuasion or black, if they own firearms, it's always attached to the criminal underworld. And they usually bring up Chicago because of the gang violence and the black on black crime. They always love to use as a narrative. And so that is the reason why you won't find as many black people willing to actually own guns, or carry guns. Even in open carry states, there's that fear that is placed on us historically, not to have guns, because even if you have a gun and you're licensed to carry and you have a clear background check, you're black, you're a criminal. You have a gun, you use that gun on me, you pulled the gun on me, you were reaching for something. And that's usually what is always used when you're pulled over by an officer. And that's the fear, I think, that most people have, even without guns. um, uh, Black citizens are afraid, so having a gun just adds fuel to the fire. And so most of the people who seem more freer with guns are this gentleman, as I just explained to you here, this Melvin Bernstein. They talk openly about guns. They're not afraid to use them. They practice on a regular basis. They have a premise behind their gun. Um, and they heavily support the NRA. And so these are usually the guys that mostly will promote, if they're in law enforcement. Once again, I said, like, even now, if it is someone that is not white, he's has like some kind of prior knowledge to guns because he served in the war, or he has the same types of obsession with guns, or he may possibly be a member of the NRA organization. And so some people are really diehard NRA members. And so, and like I said, even in government, it's like that right there. I think that's going to be a hard situation to battle with, because I believe, now this is my theory and you can come at it another way, but I believe that the NRA puts a lot of money into funding the US government. and they have a lot to do with staying in power as well. And so I don't think guns are going to be eradicated. I don't think that this situation is going to be easily solved. As a matter of fact, when they start attacking the whole issue or surrounded by guns, they always bring up the point, which is true, is that guns don't kill people, it's people that kill people. And then they also bring up the issue about, um, the people that have these guns, if their background check clears, who's at fault here? So can you really blame these organizations because they went through their necessary protocol? Now, in terms of like people having mental issues and what have you, PST, whatever that is, post traumatic PTS syndrome, post traumatic stress, um, from war, those are separate, isolated incidences, and they don't attach themselves to that. And so, even like when they talked about the young man that was involved in the Florida school shooting, his even his adoptive parents, they owned firearms. And they said that they knew he had a firearm. They knew this. And they said that he kept it locked in a safe. And they said they didn't know that he had the key, which I don't believe that. I mean, if it's his firearm, why wouldn't he have access to it? And so they knew this. They knew who they adopted. They know, your kids. Parents, your kids, right? You know when they do wrong. You know what kind of kids you have. You know when they're doing the right thing and when they're doing the wrong thing. You know the possibility of what they're capable of. Even if they're adopted children, you know your kid well enough. If he has something that is in his possession, like a gun, firearm, unless he's lying to you, these parents actually admittedly knew that this kid had a gun. He had a gun. They knew it. He came to them with it. And they had guns as well. Like I said, there it is again. So I'm like, all of this right here, these are things that that these people should consider. Notice that the kids are the ones that are protesting and becoming active on this issue. You only see a few parents, but I bet out of some of those parents, they too are gun owners. And so there's a fine line to these issues. So I just thought that was something that should be brought out, because a lot of times people don't bring these issues out. They try to evade and escape, the reality of all of this. The reason why this has been such a long fight of, the gun issue. I don't think it will ever really go away. And I don't think that they will totally get control over the guns, because there are other weapons out there. When you think that they're going to get control of one thing, there'll be something else that will come about out of all of this. So I just thought those were some important points to bring up, because I don't think that they ever really will get control of the situation like they claim they're trying to do. They can do all of the things that they want to do to push for gun reform. They can lay at the feet of the president. I don't even think that he really has too much control over it. He can write and sign into law certain restrictions and what have you. But how many of us know, like from a previous video I just did about the ghost guns, how many of us know how many guns really are out there and circulating, and what kind of gun markets are out there? And I don't know if anybody realizes, but even in Vice News, when they went to, I believe it was like the Philippines, they actually make guns out there, unmarked guns and weapons. That's what they do. They try to have people come and stop them from doing this, but that is how they make their living. Some of the people are so poor that those are the only places that they can work, is in these little factories, or these little places, these little underground factories where they actually put gun parts together and then they sell them. There's a big market in that. And so it's bigger than what people really know. And so I just thought those were some things to bring out. I don't know. I really feel bad about the whole situation in terms of the fact that innocent people always tend to fall victim. And I too would say, honestly, I agree with the activism that people should have more control over this situation, but because it's gotten so far out of control and you can't pinpoint who's doing what, and there's such a big high demand in the black market, and in a black market, what I'm referring to is people who they're not stores that these people are buying guns in. They're it's an underworld. It's a whole racketeering thing going on with it. And even the Mexican president mentioned that most of the guns that have come into Mexico have come from the States. And so what do you do about that? And so that's just to give you a clue. And I'm sure some of these other people already know, but think about it. Do you really think that regular people like Melvin and other regular people, Vietnam War vets, and people who are maybe they didn't even serve, but they have a fear of an uprising? You know, there are people who are survivalists who fear that with all this governmental corruption and some of the things that have been going on, all the political fights and battles, that it could be an uprising. So I want to arm myself as a citizen. I'm an American citizen. I have a right to arm myself and bear arms if I feel like my family and my life is being threatened. And so that's the argument that these individuals will always use. And they say, as long as I'm a taxpayer, as long as I'm not breaking any laws, and I haven't hurt anyone, I have a right to bear arms. I have a right to have my guns, and keep my guns. So some people feel power behind that. And those are laws that I feel like won't be easy to combat, easy to work into, society, as even though the more we're seeing, safe zones like schools and churches and places being, crime scenes. So just what do you think about it? I mean, you could leave comments what you think about it, or let it resonate, because it's not something new. These are things that are constantly repeated over and over and over. And then when these tragedies die down and these movements die down, they don't come up again until something else happens. Thanks for listening. Bye.